So this week we get the start of what I think is going to be an amazing second round in the Western Conference playoffs, and we have the Mavericks matching up against the OKC Thunder. We already have a really good Denver Nuggets versus Minnesota Timberwolves second round that had an amazing game one, including a ridiculous performance from Anthony Edwards. So where we're at right now with the second round, generally I'm very happy. I was a little confused coming into the postseason about how these second round matchups were going to end up being, right? I didn't want to end up seeing these boring second round series and things like that because the seeding going into the playoffs was really confusing, right? It was really weird. You had a lot of seemingly elite teams that were seeded lower, like the Lakers and things like that, but things are shaped out pretty well. And the second round between the Thunder and the Mavericks is going to be very entertaining. We have this big contrast here. For one, you have this Oklahoma City Thunder team that surprised the hell out of everybody by being the best team in the Western Conference. We knew they were going to be good, but this good this early, I don't think we saw that coming. And then on the other side, we have this Dallas Mavericks squad that's trying to solidify themselves as a legitimate championship winning team. For years, they've kind of been on the verge of that. We've seen a lot of playoff appearances, especially a Western Conference Finals appearance back in 2022. Then they had a really off year after bringing in Kyrie next to Luka last season. And this year, things look like they're finally shaping up. So you have this team in Dallas that's trying to prove themselves out in the Western Conference while having one of the best rosters in the entire league. And you have an OKC squad that's trying to show that, hey, we're not just this young team that's really good. We're an actual championship contending group. So great contrast here. Great superstar star power on both sides. We have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is an MVP candidate and, in my opinion, should be the league MVP. And we have another MVP candidate in Luka Doncic on the other side, alongside with, in my opinion, the most skilled basketball player to ever touch a basketball, and that is Kyrie Irving. So the OKC Thunder did end up winning the season series 3-1. I will say the last time we saw these two teams at full strength with fully healthy rosters post trade deadline, so that's including Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington on Dallas's roster, the Mavericks were able to have their way on both ends. And that was around the time that people started considering them as an actual contender, and people were really looking at that Daniel Gafford trade as a amazing move because of what it was able to do for them from a rebounding standpoint and also a defensive standpoint. So we can look at that 3-1, just kind of taking into account that the last time we saw those two teams play fully healthy against each other, the Mavericks did have their way. This series, a lot of different things are playing out. So for one, I'm really interested in the matchups for Dallas. How are we going to stop Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? They do have a number of really good point of attack defenders. They can kind of sick on him. I think they're going to go with Derrick Jones, who's going to guard him. He had a really good first round, amazing moments while guarding Paul George. But also here's this reality. Kyrie Irving was amazing in that first round from a defensive perspective as well. Not just guarding other role players, but guarding superstar players. They stuck him on James Harden and Paul George, and he had some great moments. I would love to see some possessions with Kyrie Irving going point of attack on SGA. That would be amazing to see. So the defensive matchups there for the Mavericks are going to be very interesting. And I also think they have a lot more things going in their favor from a matchup standpoint than OKC. So OKC as a team was really good defensively, but we know that the playoffs come down to those individual matchups. You're trying to contain superstar players for a 7-game series. So they're going to go with their best guy, Lou Dort, on Luka Doncic. They have no other option, right? Shai is a solid enough defender. Jalen Williams is a solid enough defender, but none of those guys are strong enough to try to contain Luka for an entire 7-game series. And also, this is a Luka who's coming off of a pretty bad three-point shooting performance in that first round. So he has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, right? Guys like him aren't going to allow themselves to shoot it that bad throughout an entire playoff run. So they're going to put their best defender on Lou Dort. And here's the benefit of having a backcourt of Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, right? Both of those guys offensively, in my opinion, are on the same tier. Kyrie is just as good as Luka from an offensive standpoint. Okay, he's going to put their best defensive player on Luka Doncic. Now you have this responsibility of putting your second best defender on Kyrie Irving, who is just as good and just as lethal in that first round. He was more lethal than Luka Doncic from an offensive standpoint. So you're telling me for a 7-game series, OKC's second best defensive player is going to try to contain Kyrie Irving? How's that going to pan out, especially when these games end up coming down to the wire as we expected, right? We're talking about closing things out. Can a Jalen Williams contain Kyrie Irving late in the game, especially if he has rhythm going into the late fourth quarter? Can they go with SGA on him? Can he contain him, right? What are those matchups going to be for Kyrie? We know they're going to go with Luka, who I think is still going to end up having his way on Lou Dort. You also have to deal with another superstar level guard. So that's going to be very interesting to see how the OKC Thunder end up matching up from a defensive perspective against Kyrie. They didn't have to deal with that offensive firepower in that first round. CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram are a couple of tiers below a duo of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. I also like the Mavericks from a size perspective. So Chet Holmgren is great, right? But Daniel Gafford is a very, very physical big guy who can have his way on the offensive boards. There are possessions where he was able to kind of punish the Clippers with that. They have a more physical interior, right? I know Chet Holmgren is an amazing shot blocker and those sorts of things, but games are going to be mucked up. This is the playoffs. We saw that happen with the Mavericks. They were able to muck up that series against the Clippers and held the Clippers, I think, to under 95 points for a good amount of that series. They're going to muck it up and slow it down. And when that ends up happening, the game comes down to the marginal stuff. And right now, I like Dallas's size a lot more for them to win those battles on the marginal stuff, the offensive rebounds, the defensive rebounds, those sorts of things, disrupting lobs at the rim. Yeah, Chet can kind of bring Daniel Gafford out of the paint a little bit, but Daniel Gafford is a pretty solid defender when he's not sitting in the paint. He's not this amazing, right, defensive player of the year level switch defender as a big or versatile defender as a big guy, but he can survive out there. He can go out there and close out shots. And it's going to be a good test for him, right? He didn't have to deal with that as much in that first round in guarding Ivica Zubac, who spends 100% of his time sitting either in the dunker spot or in the paint. So that'll be interesting, but I like Dallas's physicality down low a lot more. And I think this is going to be a tough series for Chet to dominate, right? Daniel Gafford is a very physical big guy, right, who's a very strong finisher around the basket. And I think that difference between those two is going to definitely come and play. Also, Derek Lively can be very, very physical and is extremely athletic around the rim, right? And can win a lot of those 50-50 battles, getting those rebounds, both from a defensive standpoint and an offensive standpoint. So that'll be something to take a look at as well. And because of that, I think I got Dallas winning this series in 6 or 7. I think OKC, the point they have home court advantage the first two, does put a ton in their favor. But I think trying to stop a duo of Luka and Kyrie, it just comes down to that. It's going to be very, very tough to stop that. And also, other guys have to be able to make their shots on the perimeter, right? You have to have those guys finishing out plays like the Derrick Jones of the world, like the PJ Washingtons of the world. You have to have those guys finishing plays and getting those shots to go in when opportunities are presented to them. But it's going to be a very daunting task trying to match up your second best defensive player onto Kyrie Irving, right? Or if you want to go with Lou Dort on Kyrie, who's stopping Luka if he's able to get in rhythm. I don't think OKC has enough right now to keep Luka and Kyrie out of rhythm. And if the other guys are able to get it going offensively, then they're in a lot of trouble. If PJ's making his shots, they are in a lot of trouble. If those other guys are clicking from an offensive standpoint, it's going to be very tough for OKC when it comes down to it late in games to try to contain Luka and Kyrie. And we know they can get pretty stagnant in the end, right? In late in games when it comes to trying to close games out, where they revert into a lot of ISOs and things like that. We saw that a ton of times throughout this postseason so far. But again, those defensive matchups against Kyrie and Luka are big question marks for OKC. And I think this is a series where Dallas is going to be able to kind of get away with that. I love OKC's team first style of basketball, but you're dealing with two extraordinary, unearthly shot creators in Kyrie and Luka Doncic. And I love OKC, but do they have the amount of elite shot creators around SGA like Luka? Right? Luka, his second, his number 2 is Kyrie. Shai's number 2 right now is Jalen Williams. Jalen Williams is a great, very efficient player. But when it comes down to it, that duo is much easier to match up with, especially with Dallas's really good individual perimeter defenders that they end up having relative to Luka and Kyrie. So I've got Dallas winning this series in 6 or 7. I think OKC puts up an amazing fight. But I think the matchups are going to be very tough. Quite frankly, and I'm not hating on OKC, I thought they would have had a very tough first round if they would have had to deal with Zion Williamson, because again, You're dealing with a ton of size, a guy who can punish your interior. Yes, Chetton is an amazing shot blocker, but there are limitations to that if you're dealing with a very physical finisher like Zion Williamson. So that first round would have went differently, in my opinion, for OKC if Zion was there. It's a major difference if your best player isn't playing. Now you have to go and deal with two guys who are both 1As, right? It's not like Kyrie is a 1B to Luka's 1A. Both of those guys are 1As, straight up and down. And one of those guys is going to hit ridiculous shots on you at a ridiculously efficient rate, and is also going to go out there and play elite level defense. So I have Dallas winning in 6 or 7. I can't wait, though. I think this is going to be an amazing moment here for OKC. I want to see this Shai and Kyrie battle, and I want to see the ridiculous scoring from these backcourts. But in the end, I think Dallas ends up pulling it out and makes their second Western Conference Finals appearance of the Luka era. And I really want to see in the in the Western Conference Finals a matchup between the Timberwolves and the Thunder. Or the Timberwolves and the Mavericks. That's what I'm really, really pulling for. I would love to see that. I would love to see how that Kyrie and Luka backcourt is able to react to that elite Timberwolves defense. And I think we'll just get some unreal offensive duels between like an Anthony Edwards and like a Luka and things like that. But here, as far as this particular series, Dallas is going to end up having the edge over the younger Oklahoma City Thunder. And this is one of those things also where I think experience takes over. So we'll end up seeing, but amazing stuff in that first round from both teams. And let's see how things pan out in this second round matchup.